Welcome back. So before we actually continue, let's just talk a little bit about architecture, just quickly, just to give you something that I can reference back to. So the n-layer architecture is probably the most known architecture out there. It's the 3-layered architecture. That's probably the one you heard about, but there are also ways to do 4 and 5 layers inside the n-layer architecture. Right now, let's actually talk about the 3-layered architecture. It's a very simple architecture. You have a user interface that talks to a business logic layer, that talks to a data access layer. It stores some data in the database, returns the data back all the way up to the user interface again. So that's a pretty known architecture with some pros and some cons like everything else. The good thing with this architecture, the pro, is that it's very easy to get started with. It's an extremely easy architecture to understand. We don't need interface, we don't really need anything. We just have to know that these guys need to have a dependency on each other, and then we are good to go. But the cons with this, the backside of the coin is it's very hard to unit test this. If you want to unit test your business logic layer, you'll probably have to mock the entire database. You'll probably have to either do that or even make a fake database and copy a lot of classes, do some crazy coding in order to do unit testing of your business logic. And the truth is that the business logic is a very important area inside your software. That's actually the business that you are trying to map out in your software. So we are going to talk about another architecture that I'm going to use that's more domain-driven. It's from domain-driven design, thinking like instead of considering your software being UI, being database, being logic, you are going to start thinking that the software is actually going to be built around the business. What do we actually need in order to create a business right here? So if we are creating cars, we might need cars in the very center of our business. I don't care if it's shown on a mobile app or it's shown inside a browser. The business is the cars. So that's what the domain-driven design is all about. So we're going to try and use another architecture called the clean architecture. And there are plenty of those to pick from as well. We can use the hexagonal architecture, we can use the ports and adapter architecture, but the new one that's out there that I have seen most people use in the clean architecture is the onion architecture, and that's the one we are going to use. So just a quick introduction to the onion architecture. Instead of thinking about 3 layers like you might be used to, we are going to move into thinking about we have a core of the application. That's actually the domain, the business of the application. And the idea is that this area right here, the center of the application, should never change. It should only change if the business changes. Then we can always go and change our user interface. If we want to go from a console application to a desktop application, or maybe a web application or mobile application, this is very easy to change because we'll never change this guy. We'll just add a new hook into this area right here. Don't worry, all of this will be explained in real examples in the next lesson, but I just want to give you the theory behind it. Now, when this is actually ready to go, we can also decide how we want to persist or store the data later on. We don't want to worry about when we are building the business. We don't want to worry about how we save the data. Should it be stored in the cloud? Should it be stored in local memory? Should it be stored in a local database? Where should the data go? We can always add that later as well because that's an external source. So again, that's one of the outer layers inside this setup right here. And the final thing is later we can also figure out if we want to have a printer set up. We can also do that out here. We can also set up a mailing service out here. But again, that's nothing to do with the business logic itself. It's just ways for us to actually extend the business logic later on. So if we were supposed to look at the 3-layered architecture again and kind of go back and have an idea about how this is different, think of it this way. The business logic will actually all of a sudden be the center of the application, and these guys will be the outer layers in the onion architecture that I can always add later when I'm sure the business logic is as it should be. Let's have a look at another drawing down here. If I go further down, you'll see here's actually another way to represent that. We have a user interface that talks to the business logic layer, and we even have the database or the infrastructure area is going to also talk to the business logic down here. So that means we moved the user interface and the infrastructure area into the outer layers, just like it shows up here with the onion. And then we moved the application or the business logic into the center of our software, the most important part of our software in the center of the application. I get that is confusing right now, but don't worry, as we move to the next lesson where I start doing this in actual coding, maybe it starts making more sense. The final thing I want to mention is the reason we're doing is it's extremely easy now to do testing both of the application core, but actually also of both the infrastructure and the user interface because of the way we open this core up using interfaces. So let's end it right there. That was a lot of theory. Sorry about that, but I have to kind of cover that before we move to the next lesson where we'll dive into some actual code. So see you next time where we'll have some physical code, or at least as physical as it can be. Have fun. Bye-bye.